Kia ora everyone, this is almost everything you'll need to know about the tibia and fibula, the bones of the leg. The tibia and fibula are long bones. This is the tibia here, the larger of the two and the more medial, and this is the slender lateral fibula. They are both long bones, they have shafts, and the fibula has a head and a neck and an expanded distal portion, which becomes the lateral malleolus. The tibia doesn't have a head anatomically. Its expanded upper region, the medial and lateral condyles, and facing superiorly atop the condyles are the medial and lateral tibial plateaus, which are the articular surfaces for the femoral condyles. In between the two condyles, superiorly, is an intercondylar eminence, which consists of two tubercles, the medial and lateral intercondylar tubercles. Anterior and posterior to the intercondylar eminence are anterior and posterior intercondylar areas, which are the sites of attachment of the cruciate ligaments and the menisci of the knee joint. In between the two condyles anteriorly is the prominent tibial tuberosity, which is the attachment site for the patellar ligament from the quadriceps muscles. And just lateral to this is another tubercle, the anterolateral tubercle, which is the site of attachment of the iliotibial tract. Below the tibial tuberosity, the anterior border of the tibia becomes very narrow and sharp, and in the central area, the tibial shaft becomes very triangular in section, with medial here and lateral surfaces and the posterior surface behind. The medial surface is subcutaneous and easily palpable and is the one that faces the other leg. Distally, the expanded portion of the tibia forms the medial malleolus, most distally, and has an inferior articular surface for the talus. The bones are joined together proximally at the superior tibiofibular joint, which is a synovial joint. There's an articular surface for articular cartilage. Inferiorly, the joint is a fibrous type of articulation, so no facet for articular cartilage. It's strengthened by the interosseous membrane, which extends between the interosseous borders of each of the bones, and together with the inferior tibiofibular joint forms the tibiofibular syndesmosis. We'll look now at the posterior aspect. Here we can appreciate the posterior surfaces of the shafts of the bones, and really the only feature of the bones here is the soleal line, which is on the proximal posterior tibia, which is the site of attachment on the tibia of the soleus muscle. It also attaches onto the fibula alongside. This area here, just below the tibial plateau on the medial tibial condyle, doesn't have a name, but it's the site of attachment of the semimembranosus muscle. Inferiorly, clinicians sometimes identify this as the posterior malleolus, but that's not an anatomical term. It's known to clinicians because in complex fractures of the ankle it can fracture off, and therefore they like to have a name for it. But the medial malleolus and the lateral malleolus are the only two recognized anatomically. Returning to an anterior view, but looking down onto the superior surface, we can appreciate the large tibial plateaus here, medial and lateral, the intercondylar eminence and the anterior, especially intercondylar area here. This is the posterior intercondylar area. We can see the sharp anterior border of the tibia and therefore medial and lateral surfaces. This border here of the tibia and this here of the fibula are the interosseous borders. The interosseous membrane stretches between the two interosseous borders, so in an axial section we'd see the tibia looking something like this, with this being the interosseous border, this is the anterior border, and this is the posterior border, which gives rise to a medial surface, the one facing the other leg, which is quite subcutaneous, a posterior surface, and a lateral surface. The fibula also has an interosseous border. The fibula shaft tends to lie behind that of the tibia, so that it looks somewhat like this. Its lateral border features extensions of intermuscular septa, between which is a lateral compartment, and with the anterior compartment between the bones here and the posterior compartment. Posteriorly, the fibular shaft becomes surrounded by muscle and is not able to be palpated. The fibula can only really be palpated proximally here at the head and inferiorly here at the lateral malleolus and the most distal part of the shaft, perhaps. Looking from below, we can see the inferior articular surface of the tibia. That's its name anatomically. Again, clinicians refer to this as the tibial plafond, which is French for ceiling. Well, French isn't an anatomical language, so that tells you that it's not real. But again, the inferior surface can be involved in fractures called pilon fractures. So clinicians need to have a name for it. The lateral surface of the medial malleolus here carries articular cartilage, as does the medial surface of the lateral malleolus here, to help form the ankle mortise, which is the combined parts of the tibia and fibula that hold the trochlea of the talus. We can appreciate some of the features of the tibia in this lateral view with the fibula removed. Again, the intercondylar eminence consisting of 2 tubercles, and we'll have the anterior and posterior intercondylar areas here. The facet joint for the synovial superior tibiofibular joint, where it meets the head of the fibula. The tibial tuberosity, the soleal line here. This is the sharp interosseous border for attachment of the interosseous membrane, separating the lateral surface here from the posterior surface here. At the inferior expanded portion, this is the fibular notch of the tibia for the fibrous inferior tibiofibular joint, and we can see the articular surface on the lateral aspect of the medial malleolus for the talus for the ankle joint. Doing the same with the fibula, a view from the medial perspective with the tibia removed, the joint for the superior tibiofibular joint at the head of the fibula. The head of the fibula is quite pointy, so it has an apex, and this is the area for articulation at the inferior tibiofibular joint with the fibular notch of the tibia, and this articular surface here is for the talus and the mortise of the ankle joint. That's almost everything you need to know about the tibia and fibula bones. Next time we'll look at the bones of the foot. Until then, ka kite.